I have studied World War II history, tactics, battles, fortifications all of my life. I was in the army, I lectured on German and Russian tactics, and I thought I knew everything in all of the important parts of that war. A war that permanently changed the world. So much new world-changing technology was created then, and much of it in secret German facilities hiding underground and run by the SS. In this show, I'm researching the special and secret German weapons programs that happened during World War II, all under the command of SS General Hans Kammler. He eventually took command of one of the largest German programs, that of the rocket program. Now, in order to determine what other programs under his command could possibly be and what they could entail, we need to go to Peenemunde and take a look at the German rocket program. Look at the facilities, look at what's on the ground left there today. Also, we're going to visit a very special local historian who runs a private museum full of real German rocket parts. After World War I, Verein für Raumschifffahrt, or Society for Space Travel Association of German enthusiasts, were formed in 1927. They carried out important development work on liquid-fueled rockets. The society was led by great pioneers such as Hermann Oberth, Klaus Riedel, Johannes Winkel, Max Valiant, and Willy Ley. The first tests began at the abandoned German ammunition dump at Reichenixdorf, nicknamed Raketflugplatz. In September 1930, before Hitler came to power, the VFR requested funding from the German army. Rockets were one of the few types of military development not restricted by the Versailles Treaty. For 3 years, the VFR launched increasingly powerful rockets of their own design from this location. However, in 1932, German police began objecting to rocket tests being done within Berlin city limits. Shocker. The German army allowed them to launch a repulsor-type rocket at the army proving grounds at Kummersdorf. The VFR was forced to disband in the winter of 1933 because the organization could not meet their financial obligations. Werner von Braun went to work for the German army at Kummersdorf. Here, the Heereswaffenamt Army Ordnance Research and Development Department established the Versuchsstelle Kummersdorf West as a static testing site for ballistic missile weapons. Under the direction of Captain Walter Dornberger, an artillery officer, the Kummersdorf team was quickly able to design and build the A-1 rocket, powered by a combination of liquid oxygen and alcohol. The A-1 was followed by the A-2, which employed separate alcohol and liquid oxygen tanks. The A-2 gyroscope was located near the center of the rocket between the two fuel tanks. In December 1934, 2 A-2 rockets were launched from the North Sea island of Bochum. Each reached an altitude of about 6,500 feet. By now, Hitler had taken some interest in rockets. Parallel developments with the German Luftwaffe and army was taking place at this time, and soon they outgrew Kummersdorf and a new location was sought. On April 2, 1936, the Aviation Ministry paid 750,000 Reichsmarks for the town of Wolgast. In April 1937, the rocket group of then now 90 men moved to a much larger secret research facility built at the relative remote site of Peenemunde on the island of Usedom, off the Baltic coast of Pomerania. Besides V2s, many other missiles were developed here. The A4 development took place at the Peenemunde Öst, and the Luftwaffe took over Peenemunde West, where they developed the V1. It's an important note to make that the Army and the Air Force were both doing parallel but separate developments of missiles and rockets. And on Peenemunde, they were also separated here. That would later on lead to infighting and, quite frankly, some abuse and misuse of funding that could have been put better use if they had worked together. The estimated cost of establishing Peenemunde Öst alone was 300 million Reichsmarks. Now, by 1938, Adolf Hitler had begun to recognize the need for an effective ballistic missile weapon, and the German Ordnance Department requested that the Peenemunde team and develop a ballistic weapon that had a range of 150 to 200 miles and could carry a 1-ton explosive warhead. The size of the weapon would need to be compatible with existing railways in terms of tunnels and bends, so it would need to be transportable in the field by truck. These criteria led directly to the development of the A4 rocket. The interim test vehicle was the A3, and the A4 was named A5. A5 testing was conducted from the fall of 1938 through 39. The rockets were launched both horizontally and vertically, and were often recovered by parachutes and launched again. In 1941, Hermann Oberth was recruited by Walter Dornberger and Werner von Braun at Peenemunde, but later left the V2 rocket project and concentrated on developing solid propellant anti-aircraft rocket. Eventually, an area over 25 square kilometers and up to 12,000 people worked at the same time on guided weapons here. One of the remaining buildings is an enormous power plant, constructed in 1939 by Siemens and Schuckert. The power plant, fueled by Silesian coal, was designed to provide 33 megawatts. In 1938, a further expansion of the Army Research Facility took place, including the mass production of rockets. Also the production of liquid oxygen, the second rocket fuel component for the A4, the other being alcohol diluted with water. It was now necessary to produce these on-site in an industrial scale. Around 4 tons of each component was needed for each rocket launch, and the existing oxygen facility and development plant was no longer big enough. From July 1942, a second oxygen plant was built, where 13,000 kilos of liquid oxygen was created each day, 3 crews working around the clock. The air was broken down into its components and oxygen cooled to minus 183 degrees Celsius, and thus turned into liquid. The liquid oxygen was transported in a tank wagon to the test site. The energy requirements for the oxygen plant alone was very, very high. Of the 30 megawatt power output produced by the power plant, the oxygen plant alone consumed 22 megawatts. One more thing that's still left here in Peenemunde, in the actual Peenemunde city, is where they produce the fuel for the rockets. Now the building that is still here, and it is a fascinating building. It's a very large structure that is obviously fenced off because, well, maybe close to its last legs, but it certainly would be something that would be very high up on my bombing list if I was one of the Allies. Despite being damaged in air raids by the Allies in 1944, the oxygen production continued without any major problems. By 1942, the personnel at the Peenemunde East had grown to a workforce of over 5,000, including engineers, technicians, scientists, and all other personnel. In addition, there were thousands of construction workers building the new A4 production plant south of the test center. In 1943, this number included 3,000 mostly Eastern European forced laborers working construction. In addition, in the summer of 1943, 1,300 SS concentration camp workers were to become core of the production line workforce here. Walter Dornberger was eventually promoted to Major General and put in charge of the entire Peenemunde facility. Werner von Braun was the technical director. But of course, the SS, which saw a rise in Nazi Germany, wanted to get its claws in the rocket program. Heinrich Himmler was eyeing it with interest, and after the bombing of Peenemunde by the Allies, he finally had a chance to suggest that the SS should take over the program, run it, and provide better security, and of course labor, which they eventually did. And of course, Himmler's man was SS General Hans Kammler, who would soon be in charge of all Germany's special weapons programs, now run by the SS. Yet after the damaging Royal Air Force bombing of the facility, during the night of 17-18 August 1943, A4 manufacturing was shifted to the underground plant of Mittelwerk at Nordhausen. Smaller scale improvements and developments were still carried out here at Peenemunde. Tests of other various rockets and development took place here. although about 250 development A4 rockets were built here at Peenemunde. Important low number, telling the majority of the V2 rockets were built in other places. After the raid, Albert Speer called a meeting with Hans Kammler, Dornberger, Degenkolb and Karl Otto Sauer to negotiate the move of the A4 main production to underground factories in the Harz Mountains in early September. Peenemunde machinery, personnel for production, about 10 engineers were moved to the Mittelwerk, which also received machinery and personnel from the two other planned A4 assembly sites. After the war, the technical facility was demolished by the order of the Soviet military administration, but part of it was used again in Butzov. An important note in the suggested deal that Kammler must have made with the Americans was the supersonic wind tunnel that was here at Peenemunde. It had nozzle speeds that could record up to Mach 4.4 and was the most advanced in the world. After the war, the Americans brought it back to the US and used it for decades. Von Braun actually got it back then. Now, if Kammler had not made a deal with the Americans and agreed to move everything out of Peenemunde to the west where it was handed over to the Americans, 1945, how else would such technology fall in the hands of the Americans and not the advancing Russians, or just simply have been destroyed? On October 3, 1942, the first successful A4 was launched. The rocket attained an altitude of 60 miles and a range of 125 miles in 296 seconds flight, coming within 2.5 miles of its target and reaching a top speed of 3,300 miles per hour. On November 22, 1942, Hitler ordered the mass production of the missile, and exactly 1 month later, Armaments Minister Speer founded the Special Committee of A4 to accelerate the process so the production might begin in summer 1943. The production required a large number of drawings to be prepared and lots of special tools designed and built. Of course, all the buildings left behind here now are from the former East German Army or some from the Russians, because all the original buildings were torn down. That green building was the original test site for the V1 rocket engine, the pulse jet. I cannot believe it's still here. This is the original building where they tested the V1 engines, and the Russians did not tear it down or steal it or carry it off to Moscow, which is really something else. It does look like they tried to destroy it. Has some rebar sticking out. So besides what's left out there in the forest and the woods of the original German rocket program, this green building is the last thing standing. Here is the platform that some 5,000 workers came to every morning and left every evening to go to their housing. It is not exactly like the platform we saw at Wolfschanze, which is interesting, but there was a huge rail network around here. But one of the things I really look forward to is seeing what is actually left of the old facility. As we're driving into Test Stand 7, we see the old garages. The Russians blew up the pillars for the garages, and what you're seeing left back here on the ground is the roof that's basically just collapsed. There's a lot of ruins and leftovers in these forests, and also some 30 tons of unexploded munitions. Well, possibly. At least that's what I was told, and as a good reason to not go in there, which I may or may not have done anyway. Initially, only the very simplest of air raid shelters, a splinter shelter, was built, such as one of these, that we will visit later.
Das Layout dieses Prüfstandes ist für 100 Tonnen Schub.
On the way to test stand 7, and don't worry, before we realize that he actually speaks better English than I speak German, I will translate. We're having a conversation that, at the time, they were planning for a 100,000-ton thrust rocket. That's the thrust you would need in order to make it from Europe to America. They were planning ahead, and all the buildings, including those of Test Stand 7 as we see around, were built and constructed with that in mind, that the next generation rockets would fit here. And here we are, look at the big building. This is what is left of it as I walk the grounds of the buildings of Test Stand 7. Here's the test site number 7. It was destroyed by the Russians. And you wanted to know what is left here.
We come this way through test site number 1, and now we stay on this edge. Yes, and you walk there, and now we stay here on this point. And you see this channel, and in the channel drive a platform, and I say many more. And this is test stand 7, an oval dimension like a soccer stadium, 90 meter, 150 meters inside, 10 meter high wall. And when you see this in Cape Canaveral, it's the same, but the dimension is very a little bigger. You see this part is for pick up one of the test towers, go in this workshop. Yeah. A big gate in front of the workshop. In the workshop come one rocket in this test tower and delivered with this platform from here to this point, and then the test tower self-propelled and go over the fire ditch. Today we say flame deflector.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys quite understand how important technologically this place was. For history, for the space program, both the Russian and the American space program, it all started here with Van Nuffen Braun. And there are pieces of this place left strewn all over the place. But this time, we are at the foundation of a building, and we know what it was. I mean, it's nice that we, for a change, can go out here and look at rubble, and we know what it was. This is testing site 7. This is the workshop, or what's left of the workshop from testing site 7. It was demolished by the Russians after the war. And this is the biggest piece of the Peenemunde test site that's really left. And you always hear me talk about how much I hate when historical places are destroyed and not preserved. This really hurts because the space program is something that we're still enjoying the benefits of today. And you imagine the sound and the roar and the rockets. And the mosquito, now we just got the mosquitoes. But damn, look at this, guys. You wanted to know what was left at Peenemunde of the rocket program, of the walls. This is the workshop. Cables and the mosquitoes. Look at these. Here you get a cable, a little bit of insulation. And these buildings were absolutely enormous. But remember, they were not designed for the V2. They were designed and built for the next generation A-10. And this is not something you're gonna see walking through the Peenemunde area, unless you take the tour with this really cool dude, and he really is. But we actually have an underground. We actually have an underground here. We have a tunnel underneath. Don't know if that was drainage or what that was. You got cabling running through there. as far as the eye can see. They really blew it up good. As we have come to know that expression, it's blown up well. And this is blown up well. But you know what? Of all the things, part of one of the doors, I believe. Writing on there. I will say anything with writing here would be really, really cool. A piece of rubber. Now, of course, before the Russians blew this place up, they took everything that was of use to their space program or rocket program back to Russia. But still, pipes, the cabling, the wires, all of this was all part of the German rocket program. And the missing pieces became part of the American and the Russian rocket program. But this is a really heavy-duty pipe. Oh, son of a bitch. God, I hate mosquitoes. 100 to 10. And DW. Jeez. Look at how big this was. And this was just the workshop. This was enormous. What was that part of? That's a radiator. It is literally an old radiator that has been exploded. This is like a graveyard.
Hmm?
This is like a cemetery to technology.
Hmm?
It's different. It's different than when you see just a battlefield. You see, this is more. This is a little sad.
Yes.
Because a battlefield isn't sad. I'm not sure where I'm going with this. Now, I did say I was going to shy away from the official Peenemunde Museum, and I really did. However, my friend here have set up shop in the old stables, a building in an old farm that still existed and survived the Russian occupation, as it was just a farm. Here, he and his friends have amassed an impressive array of the old World War II weaponry, the test beds, the weapons parts, rocket parts, entire rockets, and a whole lot of electronics that was related to the program. It's really impressive to see what have literally washed up on shore, or unfortunately, as in this case, been shot down. British bombers and parts of those that went on the bombing raids here in Peenemunde and was shot down. There's a lot of interesting and original parts that I want to show you. The V1 was made in quite a few different configurations, one piloted. And honestly, of the two rocket programs, and I will lay out this case later, this was probably the more successful one. Now, this is the late war 1,000-liter V1 fuel tank. Originally, the V1 had a 690-liter fuel tank, but after the Allied invasion of Normandy, the firing ramps were pushed further and further back, and they needed to increase the ranges of the V1, so they increased the fuel tank. This is original and washed up on shore, literally, out here in Peenemunde, and not far from the location where we just were. They rebuilt the cockpit on this one to a 1-to-1 size, and you may notice it is a very, very small and tight squeeze for those few test pilots that dared fly it. Hannah Reich comes to mind, and remembering, after her test flight and broken a jaw, she said you would never do that again.
Das ist der Igniter for V2?
Ja.
Igniter for V2. V2.
V2.
Welche Sprache heute?
And obviously he has the original nose cone of the V2 rocket, where the detonator was. Remember, the V2 would ideally impact nose first, so the detonator was in the nose. And here's one in a box. And interestingly enough, just like with any other artillery shell, you screw on the detonator on top of the missile. That will fly and land and impact with the speed of sound. And of course he rescued one of the original, or part of one of the original test stands that was made to measure the rocket thrust, with the instrument still in place. And here's something you will never ever see. Did you know the 88 flak needs 28 seconds to reach 10,000 feet? Which is approximately where the Allied bombers were.
No.
Meters.
Meters, yeah.
28,000 meters?
10,500 meters in 28 seconds.
28 seconds.
Yeah.
That's way too long. So the last project Werner von Braun was working on was this, because that would make that altitude in 6 seconds. And where are you going to see one? Ever, other than here? The Typhoon was developed by a small team here at Peenemunde. It was about 2 meters long, spin stabilized with 4 small fins at the base. The rockets were fired from either 30 or 50 barrel launchers that was mounted on an adapted 88mm launcher. It was an anti-aircraft, unguided rocket system, where waves of small, cheap Typhoon flak rockets would be launched at masses of Allied bombers. The Typhoon was further developed by the U.S. and pretty much identical to what we see working today. The project was headed by Klaus Schulfen, and it was built by the Elektromechanische Werke here in Karlshagen. The rocket was driven by a liquid-fueled engine. The liquid propellant used was a hypergolic mixture consisting of an oxidizer and a fuel. They were both fed into the combustion chamber under pressure. The pressure was provided by a small cordite charge fired into the fuel tanks, in the process bursting a pair of thin diaphragms that allowed the fuel and oxidizer to flow into the combustion chamber, propelling the rocket. Also, a solid propellant version of the Typhoon was on the design table when the war ended. The Typhoon's nose was fitted with a contact fuse, one of 2 contact fuse designs developed by Mende Radio of Dresden. One used a condenser charged with an ionization of the exhaust gas stream, discharged through a tube in the rocket's nose. The other, developed by Rheinmetall Borsig, used a conventional impact fuse design. A timed self-destruct fuse was also fitted near the rear of the Typhoon to destroy the rocket if it failed to hit the target.
Oh, Fritz X.
Fritz X, ja.
So das ist ein Fritz X.
Ja, genau. Das ist der Hinterteil.
The Fritz X was a guided, armor-piercing, high-explosive bomb. It was a penetrating weapon intended to be used against armored targets, such as heavy cruisers and battleships, and it was. It had an aerodynamic nose, 4-stop wings, and a box-shaped tail unit consisting of roughly 12-sided annular sets of fixed surfaces and a cruciform tail with a thick surface within the annulus, which contained the Fritz X radio controls and a tubular air brake, without which the bomb would drop way too fast and simply penetrate and pass through the target. Fritz X was steered by the bombardier of the launching aircraft, over a radio link between the aircraft's keel transmitter and the weapon's Strasbourg receiver. The bombardier had to be able to see the target at all times, and the Fritz X had a flare in the tail, so it could be seen from the controlling aircraft. It was accurate to within 15 meters, dropped from 7,000 feet. 1,400 was built, and it was deployed successfully in combat from 1943. It weighed about 3,000 pounds and would drop at a speed of 767 miles an hour. The only Luftwaffe unit to deploy the Fritz X was Gruppe 3 of Kampfgeschwader 100 Viking. The Fritz X was guided by a Kiel-Strasbourg control set, which sent signals to the movable spoilers in the thick vertical and horizontal tail fin surfaces. Within the annular tailfin structure, this control system was also used for the unarmored rocket-boosted Henschel HS-293 anti-ship ordnance bomb, which we'll see in a minute. The Fritz X was first deployed on 21st July 1943 in the raid on the Augusta harbor in Sicily. A number of additional attacks around Sicily and Messina followed, and on 9 September, the Luftwaffe achieved their greatest success with this weapon. After the Italian armistice with the Allies had been announced, the Germans knew that the Italian fleet was going to steam out of port and head for Tunis to surrender to the Allies. To prevent the ships from falling into their hands, 6 Dorniers took off from the 3rd Gruppe. They were each carrying a single Fritz X, and the Italian battleship Roma, the flagship of the Italian fleet, received 2 hits and 1 near miss, and it sank after her magazines exploded. 1,300 men went down. Including the Admiral, Carlo Bigdami, he died as well. Her sister ship, the Italia, was also seriously damaged. Later on, the American light cruiser, USS Savannah, was hit by Fritz X on 11 September, and it was forced to retire to the United States for 8 months. Just worth of repairs, one single Fritz X has passed through the roof of the sea turret and damaged the control party when it exploded in the lower ammunition handling room. The blast tore a large hole in the ship's bottom, opened up a seam on her side, and blew out all the fires in the boiler room. The R-4M unguided rocket was the latest evolution of the air-to-air rockets. It was developed to be used against Allied bombers, and it was found by the German Air Force that rockets were generally lighter than the cannons that were mounted in the nose of the Bf-109 or Bf-110. The rockets were developed and they were used against ground targets as well, such as during the last defense of Prague, where they were mounted of Me-262s. Here's an R-4M with the remnants of its actual pods. The anti-aircraft version of the rocket was using a warhead of 55 millimeters with 520 grams of percent hexagon explosive charge. It was guaranteeing with one hit it would be one kill. Each rocket weighed 3.2 kilos, and it was provided with enough fuel to fly a good 1,000 meters, just outside the effective range of most bombers' defensive guns. The main body of the rocket consists of a simple steel tube with an 8-based hinge flip-out fins out of the tail for stabilization. They deploy immediately after launch. A battery typically consists of 2 groups of 12 rockets, and when all 24 were salvoed in an attack, they would fill an area of about 15 by 30 meters at a 1,000-meter distance, a density that made almost certain that the target would be hit. The R-4M was usually fired in 4 salvos of 6 missiles with intervals of 70 milliseconds for a range of 600 meters. The R-4M typically had a flight speed of roughly 1,890 kilometers an hour, so 1,170 miles an hour. 2 warheads were available for the R-4M, the common PB-3 with a 0.4 charge for anti-aircraft use, a larger shaped charge, similar construction to the Panzerschreck or Panzerblitz, for anti-tank use. The almost exact design is still in use by the U.S. Air Force today. The Ruhrstahl Ru-344 or X-4 was one of the first wire-guided air-to-air missiles. It was designed and developed from June 1943 by Ruhrstahl. The idea was to build a missile with enough range to allow it to be fired from outside of the effective range of most bombers' guns, also called standoff weapon. It had a BMW 109 448 rocket motor that would accelerate the missile to over 1,150 kilometers an hour. The missile was spin stabilized at about 60 RPM or 1 rotation a second. So to avoid radio jamming, it was wire guided and controlled by a joystick, just like the modern tow missile as we see them today, and I fired one, they're fun. The rocket burned a hypothetical mix of S stuff and R stuff. There was no room for a fuel pump, so the fuel was forced into the motor by pistons inside the long tubes. The tubes being coiled, similar to the coil spring, just to fit inside the airframes, and the Germans were planning to replace the motor with solid fuel, the sign as soon as possible. The warhead itself consisted of a 20-kilogram fragmentation device that had a lethal radius of about 8 meters. Now, given how hard it was for the pilot to accurately determine where the missile was at 1,000 meters away, it was also mounted with a proximity fuse. The Henschel HS-293 was World War II Germany's anti-ship weapon, radio-controlled glide bomb.
Das ist ein Zusatzmotor für eine Gleitbombe.
With a rocket engine slung underneath it like the one we just saw. It was designed by Herbert A. Wagner. The 293 project started in 1940, based on the Gustav Schwerer Propellerwerke, a pure glide bomb that was designed already in 1939. The Schwarz design did not have a guidance system. Instead, it used an autopilot to maintain a straight course. It was intended to be launched from a bomber at sufficient distance to keep the aircraft out of range of the anti-aircraft fire. A Henschel team under Dr. Wagner developed it the following year by adding a Walter HWK 109-507 rocket engine underneath it, providing 590 kilograms of thrust for 10 seconds. This allowed the bomb to be used at a lower altitude and at an increased range. The weapon consisted of a modified standard 500-kilogram bomb, with an added Kopfring on the nose for maritime use, to help ensure the relative perpendicular axis of impact, with a thin metal shell and a high explosive charge inside, equipped with a rocket engine beneath the bomb, a pair of aileron-fitted wings, and the received FUG-230 component of the Kehl Strafburg MCLOS guidance and control system, one it shared with the Fritz X we just saw. The elevator was operated by electric-powered jack screw and the only proportional control, while the ailerons were operated with the solenoids. Remote flight controls were provided through the Kehl Strafburg link, while the HS-293's control setup having no movable rudder and no vertical tail fin. The HS-293 had a range of about 12 kilometers, 7.5 miles. It was intended to destroy unarmored ships, unlike the unpowered armor-piercing Fritz X, which used the same guidance system. 5 colored flares were attached to the rear of the weapon to make it visible at a distance to the operator. During night operations, flashing lights instead of flares were used. After the missile was launched, the bomber had to fly in a straight and level path at a set altitude and speed parallel to the target, so as to be able to maintain slant line of sight, and could not maneuver to evade attacking fighters, which sometimes would cause the boarding of the attack. The HS-293 also served as a basis for a number of developments, one designed specifically to penetrate the water and strike a ship below the waterline with a long, conical-shaped forebody like the one we're seeing over in the corner, and a pair of HS-293A's standard Walter HWK 109-507 booster engines at the wing roots as well. Now, the Henschel 293D was a television-guided bomb, where the camera was placed in the nose cone of the Henschel, and it was the first camera-guided bomb that was ever developed and deployed in combat. Just because we have cool stuff in the U.S. military, it sometimes came from somewhere else. And this is the world's very first camera-guided bomb. And you remember those videos you saw when we dropped guided bombs over Iraq and so on and so forth? This was the first screen that was a pilot ever looked at while dropping a bomb with a camera in the nose.
Das ist also original nachgebaut, ja? Und hat dann hier das Bild gesehen von der Fernsehkamera. Ne? Und hatte einen Joystick und konnte dann nach dem Bild, das Flugzeug konnte total abdrehen, ne? Also ganz woanders hin. Gibt es einen kurzen Film. Da ist also dieser, wo
There you go. And that is what the pilot looked at. You see the little ship down there? See where the ship goes? It looks familiar, doesn't it? And then it goes black. And that was on that screen. And the fact that it's sitting here is cool beyond a measure I cannot explain. This is almost cooler than Harley Davidson. The Wasserfall rocket, for some reason, have always been one of my favorites. There's original parts here, and here we see one of their original engines. It was half as big as that of the V2, and there's only very few parts left of any of the Wasserfall. There's only one intact in America and one in England. It was 8.5 meters long and almost a meter in diameter. It was Wernher von Braun's last real serious project, and 45 rockets of these had been fired here. The Wasserfall Ferngelenke Flare-Rakete, waterfall remote-controlled AA rocket. It was a guided supersonic surface-to-air missile. Development was not quite complete by the end of the war, and it was not used operational. It was based on many of the technologies developed for the V2 program, including the rocket itself, which was essentially a much scaled-down version of a V2 airframe. The rocket engine used a new fuel, as it was expected to be stored in ready-to-fire form for several months, and the guidance system used external fins to control instead of relying entirely on the steerable rocket motor exhaust, like with the V2. Among development programs, control of the high-speed rocket was significant concern, leading to the development of a new radio control system, where the operator sat in a reclining chair so that they could see the target as it passed overhead. Another significant problem was the lack of the suitable proximity fuse, which was required as there was no way for an operator to visually determine when the rocket was close enough to a target and direct it above it and set off the charge. A radar-guided system was still in development when the war ended, and yet it is one of my favorite World War II rockets. The Ensign was a surface-to-air anti-aircraft missile that was the very first to use a radio-controlled guidance system. Development was plagued by different problems and also organizational problems, and it was cancelled in January 17, 1945, and the Luftwaffe shifted focus on more promising programs. The Ensign was built in wood to save on weight, and this model is likewise built of wood. The actual booster rockets can be seen lined here down beside it. The wings were wood, and it had 4 booster rockets on each side, and it would rotate as it flew. The Henschel HS-117 Schmetterling. It was a radio-guided German surface-to-air missile. It was also developed as an air-to-air version. The operator would use a telescopic sight and a joystick to guide the missile by radio control, which was detonated by acoustic or photoelectric proximity fuses at 10 to 20 meters. In May 1944, 59 missiles were tested, some from beneath in Heinkel 111. Half of them failed, but mass production was still ordered in December 44, with deployment to start in March 1945. Operational missiles were to be launched from a 37mm gun carriage. In January 1945, a prototype for mass production was complete, and production of 3,000 missiles a month was anticipated. But in February, Hans Kammler cancelled the project. These are the carriers for a large Nebelwerfer rocket system. They were used throughout the war. They were unguided rockets. They were extremely potent and successful. However, here at Peenemunde, they did a very special test with these. They mounted them to a submarine and fired them successfully submerged already in 1942. And what makes that interesting, besides the fact that they're actually fired exactly like we fire missiles from submarines today, is that they were also tested with a coal dust bomb. That would make them fired in a series an extremely powerful area-destructive weapon, an air-fuel bomb in a series. They could cover and destroy everything within several square miles. What is interesting to me is that they were successful in their trials and testing, and then the idea was abandoned. Yet I suspect that the coal dust version was tested and used against the Russians on the Eastern Front, and they were always almost deployed at the Allied after the invasion of Normandy. I think more research needed to put into exactly what the Nebelwerfer did with a coal dust warhead.
After the assassination attempt, July 20th, of Adolf Hitler, everything the next day was transferred to SS control under Heinrich Himmler, including everything here at Peenemunde. So Dornberger, the next day, started the company, registered it in Berlin, and hired all the staff from here to work for that company. So they would not technically come under SS control, but that did not last very long.
The Royal Air Force don't hit it. 80 American Air Force hit it. This 1944, 1 year later. I'll tell you why later.
I think I know why.
The Germans planned for 100 tons.
But they built this big enough for the 100
Yes,
ton.
yes, that's right. From this point to reel this rest of the channel, and you see the test towers stay on his parking positions behind the concrete, and you see here the platform and one test tower go on the platform. And this picture is also from 44 after American Air Force destroyed this.
So this is a German taking picture.
Yeah, from the ground, from this place. So this is a little bit from the shape from the wall. From here to the bunker. We stay here, and inside left goes the channel to the bunker for cables.
Inside the
inside
wall.
Yeah, and then goes the channel in the ground here.
Oh, and there's the ditch around it.
Yes.
That's
And
so this is the cable ditch,
yes,
and this is
fire ditch.
the fire ditch. That's where all the mosquitoes come from.
So you see this edge,
Yes.
and this is the original edge from the fire ditch. Go 6 meters deep and come on the other side to 0 level. Yes. There. And over the middle of the fire ditch stays the test tower inside the rocket, and this was one of the two tasks of the test 7, testing of the guidance system of the A4 rocket. With this test tower, this picture was picked up from right inside and show the test tower over the fire ditch, and via rail railway wagon for liquid oxygen here and for alcohol.
And then, of course, when the rocket was tested, that was wheeled back out, right?
Yes.
Especially the liquid oxygen, I guess.
Yes. You see here the A4 rocket, and you see the layout from the test tower is also for the next generation of rockets. Yes,
That's a lot.
This 14 meters. Yes,
That's a lot bigger than the.
The test sequence is the rocket is in this test tower, clamped by holders, and can change the angel in all directions, but can launch from the side. It's not possible. Yeah? And the rocket motor is vertical, and the rocket was ignited. The steam come out and divided in 2 parts in this direction, the flame deflector inside. Yeah? And then the rocket, then one people gave the rocket a push in a direction, and the rocket stay not vertical, and the guidance must bring the rocket in very fast time in the vertical position, and this was a value for for this guidance system.
So this is where they tested the guidance system.
Rocket worked well or not. Yeah. So, but this is very expensive. You have only 1 minute time for testing. After 1 minute, the rocket tanks are empty. 4.5 tons alcohol and 4.5 tons liquid oxygen burnt out, and the rocket is empty.
So technically, that's all it would take to get it to England. About a minute of burning.
From the complete flight path, the flight time is 5 minutes, and from this 5 minutes, only 1 minute the rocket motor is active.
And that's all it needs to get up to
Yeah.
the
to the highest point of the trajectory.
and then the
yeah.
rest of it is just a coming.
Uh,
It's a
and
ballistic missile.
ballistic missile. Yeah. Stopped in 28 kilometers high. Then the rocket motor shut down, and then fly the rocket without propulsion to the highest point and come down later. Yeah. So and this is very expensive and. One man from Brown team, Dr. Hölzer, have a very good idea. He brings this mechanical ballistical problem in parts of the former electronics, electron tubes in this time, electron tubes, resistors, capacitors, and other things. Yes, and bring this together, and the result was the first analog computer in the world. Really? And this computer allowed the same sequence make in the office. Without fuel.
That's a lot cheaper.
Without fuel and without time limiting. Yeah, and this was the first. Today we say simulation, electronic simulation from a mathematical ballistical problem in the world. Yes, and a downgrade system from this analog computer was the guidance of the rocket. Yes? The first fly-by-wire guidance in the world. Yeah? And for when all things are solved with an analog computer, then the final test make here with real things.
What is that thing?
It's a hydrant.
A fire hydrant?
Yeah.
It's a big ass fire hydrant.
Delivering water.
For emergencies or for?
Yes. Yeah. It's a picture from wartime. You see the hydrant?
Yep.
Yes.
There it is.
And,
yep.
you see behind this team the launch table.
Yep.
And the A4 rocket. The first step in the sky was taken here on this place, and I think von Braun have a big step, take a big step here on this place for his next step in America with a Saturn V. This picture is from 26th May 1943. The same place. You see in the end. The wings, the fin of the A4 rocket, stay there, and these people come to us. Yes.
So let's see who we got here.
So let's begin in right hand side.
Yeah.
Werner von Braun.
Of course.
The technical, ever with handkerchief in his jacket.
Yes.
Also after the war, ever with.
Always,
yeah. This is General Dornberger, the military chief from this. This is General Leib, the chief of the staff in Berlin, the next higher staff. This is Admiral Dönitz.
That's Dönitz, yes.
The chief of the German submarines.
Yeah.
And later, after Hitler, the last chancellor for 2 days. Yeah. So this is Schenk Graf von Stauffenberg and General Albrecht. Stauffenberg was the
he was assigned to the Reserve Army.
Assassination against Hitler.
And he was assigned to the Reserve Army.
Yes. So, and this is General Field Marshal Milch, the second man behind Göring.
Yep.
And this is Dr. Thiel.
Dr. Thiel,
Dr. Thiel is a developer of the 25 tons rocket motor.
Yeah,
Only two people wasn't never here. First is Hitler, was never here, and second is Goebbels, the propaganda minister. Goebbels write in his book the intelligence from the enemy countries have a look for him in Germany on which place he go or not. Yes, and therefore he decided that he come not to Peenemunde.
He didn't.
And we see a railway wagon with erection system for a modified launch table and one rocket stay on the table. Yeah.
So they were going to launch these off railroad cars?
Of railroad cars, yes. And this order come from the SS.
How many people would it take to launch a rocket like that off a railroad car?
Of a railroad car? I think 30.
And one of the other test stands are closer to the ocean. On this place, the 56th Schmetterling rocket was fired, but also my favorite.
Hier sind die 65 Raketen gestartet.
What we have left here that I'm standing on, and I think it's really cool to stand on it. This is the original test site for the Wasserfall. This is where it was, and this is what's left. All right, granted, there were not a lot of large buildings for this particular missile, but this was one of the things von Braun he was tasked with building because the Allies were devastating Germany at the time and something had to be done. Von Braun was the one to try to build it, and it worked, and they fired, how many did they fire from here?
44
44 Wasserfalls were fired.
for testing purposes.
Was tested here. And you're going to have to imagine on your own what it would have been like to stand here at various times in this really, really beautiful place by the ocean. So this is the hole where it actually was. Was it the blast?
Inside there was a flame deflector,
Yeah.
and bring the flame in this direction to the Baltic. And this was a hole for emergency defilling of the rocket.
Oh, this was?
Yes. For one of the fuels, I think for nitric acid. Yep.
So if anything went wrong, they could quickly release the fuel into this nice little pond. But basically you have all the setup of any regular rocket firing base. You have a blast deflector, you can empty it quickly, and you have a great view.
Now, a conversation we absolutely need to have is, was it worth it for Germany to spend the time, effort, and money in these weapons programs? And I wanted to break down the actual benefit-cost analysis of the V1 versus the V2, including the fact that the entire German rocket program combined cost twice as much as the Manhattan program. And I think that's food for thought. Now, General Kammler was very interested, as was Himmler, in taking over the V2 rocket program, as they indeed did. Kammler was in charge of all the special weapons programs for the Third Reich, but he showed less interest in the V1. Of course, he had other rockets that were smaller and cheaper than the V2, and costs for the V2 went down throughout the war. But I want to break it down. Now, the V1 was a design that dated all the way back to a concept beginning in 1915. However, in 1939, when the Heereswaffenamt wanted a rocket that could deliver a 1-ton warhead over 200 miles away, the design was brought back, and what the V1 could deliver was a range of 299 kilometers, that's 186 miles, at a speed of about 700 kilometers an hour. And it was only capable of carrying a half-a-ton warhead. However, it was cheap. It was extremely cheap, and it was easy to produce, and the Luftwaffe liked it, and they put it into production. 10,492 V1s were launched against Britain. 4,261 V1s had been destroyed by fighters or shot down by anti-aircraft or barrage balloons. 2,400 or so landed within the Greater London area, inflicting 6,000 casualties. Now get this, the V1 only cost 5,000 Reichsmarks. On the other hand, you had the A4, which was exceptionally expensive. It cost a lot to run, it took a lot to fire. It would take over 30 tons of potatoes just for creating the fuel to fire it, and this at a time where a lot of German and foreign population were starving. They would cost 100,000 Reichsmarks at the beginning of production and reduced down to 50,000 Reichsmark later on. 3,225 were launched, killing about 9,500 people. In addition to that, approximately 12,000 or so forced laborers and concentration camp prisoners also died, which made it a more costly weapon to produce than damage inflicted on the enemy. And to put that into perspective, there was about 6,048 V2s produced. For the same price as one V2 rocket, you could have 4 Tiger tanks or 4 Panzer IVs. You could have had 48,000 tanks for the same cost as it was for the V2 rocket program, which really did not do much for winning Germany the war in any which way. However, for future development and space flight, it absolutely was merited the cost, especially from the point of view of America and Russia, who benefited from all the money and lives that had been wasted and spent by Germany in order to create this rocket that they were now benefiting from post-war. But again, the German rocket program cost twice as much as the Manhattan Project, which defeated Japan and won America the war. The cost of Heisenberg's nuclear project, granted one that I have always claimed was underfunded deliberately, was only 8 million Reichsmark. Building Germany the Atlantic Wall cost 3.7 billion Reichsmarks, and the cost of Project Riese is between 150 and 200 million Reichsmarks, just to put things in perspective. I'm not entirely sure that Germany was not wasting its money in all the wrong things that were not winning them the war. However, some very special projects were giving a lot of money. Many of them were under the auspices of the SS, and I'm still trying to find out exactly what they did by calculating the money spent and the slave labor used on the different projects. But clearly the rocket program started a lot of technology. It created a lot of know-how that funneled out into different other branches. Now, as opposed to the enormous amounts of fuel, money, and lives wasted on the V2, the V1 flew 8,025 sorties. It dropped 14,600 tons of bombs, and it only consumed 4,600 gallons of fuel. It also caused 22,682 casualties, which makes it more successful than the V2.
This was the site of the guardhouse, of the original guardhouse, as we've seen the pictures leading in to Peenemunde, with the pillars up here in the front. Of course, again, the Russians destroyed the building. Lots and lots and lots of rubble. There's one of the outer walls. Yeah, here's the corner. And another corner. This is what's left of the old main gate entrance to Peenemunde. And of course, to get into the area, you not only have to show your papers, your identification, you were given different colored chips denoting what zone you were allowed entry to. Those could change, so you could double check that people had access and were allowed to go where they needed to be. A piece of the pipes. And what's left of what was a herringbone floor, looks like, and tiles off to the side, and then the main pillars from the front entrance here, and the staircase. So again, all that's left of history is a foundation. I went a few clicks down the road, now I'm walking back towards the Peenemunde center, passing by the railroads, because in the forest here there's a lot of different little things, little bunkers and stuff that's not on the tour. Let's see if I can find them. This was the largest passenger train station at the Peenemunde, where this was the last stop for regular civilian passenger trains to be able to change onto the factory network. And there's a 183 meter long tunnel underneath here that had to be kept dry because it's below the groundwater level. And this is where people who were visiting or working here going to the Karlshagen camp, they would dismount here. And for factory workers, it was free to take the train, the civilian trains, but not for their relatives. And as we can clearly see, this is no longer being drained. See the steps down leading down to it. Seriously, what a shame. What a shame that that is locked off. There should be an air raid shelter down here. Let's see if we can find that. Until all the way up to 1942, 43, there was only 4 major air raid shelters. Then they started building these smaller splinter-proof shelters, only 30 centimeter thick walls, which basically a pipe in the ground with an angled entrance. Not something you see a whole lot anywhere near any of the battlefields of Wolfschanze we've seen, because a direct hit on any of these would prove very, very, very bad for those inside. What you call almost a big sewer pipe. And still, of course, it's hollow, so you can hear everything resonating in here, which makes it even less fun if it doesn't aerate. Seems to be cracking a little bit out here in the entrance. And that's pretty much it. That was pretty much a little splinter-proof shelter. So, not much in protection of any kind of direct hit. Now we can go look for unexploded ordnance out here. Speaking of, I see something vertical that looks a little green. See a little bit of cement here. Not sure what I'm seeing here. I see foundation of a brick building. Here's something over here. Wonder what this was. Look like little storage rooms. So out here, beyond the fencing, see a thicker foundation here. A little bit of rebar, maybe, what's that, 30 centimeters, 40 maybe, on red brick, ground level. Piece of metal something sitting here. An attachment for something that would have gone into screws. Interesting. Now I know there should be another bunker on the other side of the island, which is essentially a peninsula. Now, don't know what this was, but here is some more cement. Oh, this was fairly thick. Now here's the main path on the railroad, and in here is something rather large and gray that looks like the reason why I always wear green when I sightsee in nature. What have we here? A piece of something. Doesn't look like it used to have been a fighting position. I'm standing on a piece of this that's actually moving. How special. I don't want to jump off that. Yep. What the hell was this? Now it looks like it spontaneously disassembled itself with some force. What the hell am I looking at? Would have been the outside, pieces of metal. Looks like there's one subterranean level. This was a rather long building. Yeah, there is a subterranean level. You can see down there. Well, I don't know if you can clearly, but there was. red brick could have been the roof of the structure with these pillars. Could have been storage. I don't know. Guess I'm gonna have to ask. And here's a one long beam running. I don't know what that was either. That's interesting. What is that? There's a lot of interesting pieces right here. It would have been more helpful if I had studied. So this would have been the outside, because this is weatherproofing. And then you have this. Looks like a rail. Looks like a rail a crane could have been on. And the tile, and there were holes going through it. This is very interesting. Yeah, what's on the bottom there, it looks like that was hitting the roof. It does go on and on. This is not something I've seen before, obviously. Whoa, this continues all the way in. This was very large. Ooh, here's a piece of something that is not moving. And here's the other piece of it. Looks like it would have been a holder for some sort of container. Possibly an access tunnel going through here. Continuing here. So there'll be an access tunnel leading through that big building. And the rubble continues all the way in the forest here. And here's another skeletal remain of a little critter that decided to crawl up on this mound and die here. Let's try to assume I will not do the same thing. But this was not from bombing, this was Russian demolition work. There's more bones of the little guy. Look at this, this is interesting. Wow, and this continues all the way in. Railroad loading platform? I don't know. I truly do not know. I would love to give you a guess, but... And over here, and as far as I can see inside in the woods, it continues. There's a plate and hooks. Don't see a lot of metal sheeting, what we're usually looking at. Of course, no writing on any of it. Damn. This just goes on. And on and on and on. And here's another little grave. Well, access tunnel, I'm assuming. Yeah, there's cross tunnels between them too. And here's a third piece of the structure, wood tunnel, and more red brick. This just continues, continuously. I know that's a repetition of words, but so far I'm looking at least 150 meters long building or structure. And it keeps going. There's parts of it everywhere that has spontaneously disassembled itself with some vengeance. Wow. This was a very, very large building. This could have been this is the original manufacturing site. Damn, it continues. I can't see where this ends. This is absolutely fascinating. This building was huge. And here's a third, and there's a third tunnel running parallel underneath here and there, and one or two more over there underneath the building. So it continues this direction too. This must have been the old manufacturing print. This must have been the old manufacturing plant. I don't remember pictures of anything from Peenemunde that was this big. There are pipes in the ground. And it continues. This is 3, maybe 400 meters deep, right parallel with the railroad. This is an enormous building. I'm sitting on the roof here. I'm trying to go deeper in the forest. Yep, there's another wall of it with something. What is this? If I didn't know any better, I would say it's a milk jug. I sort of do know better. Tar. It smells of tar. It does look somewhat period. Anchor sitting in the ground, sticking up there. I will GPS mark this, and then I will ask somebody what the hell this was. Because this was clearly something special. There's another pipe sticking out of the ground. There's clearly an underground to whatever this was. And there was clearly an above ground that was higher than this. So, two-story building, interlaced with access channels underneath, several layers of them. What's over there? The outer metal, rubble, everywhere. This was an enormous building. And I will goes all the way. It just continues. I would like to come back to this when I have an idea what it was, because that will make looking at it so much more interesting. Branch. Piece of metal again. Here's another. It could have been a water container or oil. Actually, I think that's what it was. This could have been a smaller water, oil, fuel container. Again, it's impossible to see. No signs of barbed wire or British bombs. Electrical cable sticking out of the ground. And look at these. This is very heavy rebar. There's some almost anchor points to something. That looked like a sewage tunnel. And more of the building. And more of these metal plates. I'm more and more convinced they are reservoirs, containers, as we've seen in large bunkers on the east wall. We've seen those before inside the bunkers, and they couldn't be bothered removing them, so they just blew them up in place, and 75 years later they're all buckled. This is what we're looking at. And just to prove that I have not actually broken any of the laws here, I'm going to be nice and let the camera roll as I walk out to, holy hell. Remember how there's always a hole behind you? There's a hole behind us. Let's see what's in there. Nothing. Sewage. And here's a, Jesus. Holy shit. You really, really want to watch. You really want to watch out and be careful when you do this, because especially if you're trying to document these areas and you're just for a minute not paying attention to where you're going, you don't know what hellhole, literally, you might fall into. There's always a hole behind you. Remember that. It's not just a t-shirt anymore. But like I said, this is not fenced off, providing I can find out where I came in. This was very special, and I really look forward to seeing what this is.
The best determination I could make for the huge facility I found destroyed here is the Pilot Rocket Factory Workshop. And that is one of the main reasons I wanted us to go here, to see exactly the scale of what it would take to build something like this.
Studying history and studying the things that came before has nothing to do with taking sides or passing judgment. That is for you and your own conscience to do. As a historian, what is interesting and important is to document what happened, and especially keep it fresh in memory when it is something that is as important as what happened here at Peenemunde, and in generally what the Germans did during World War II in technological development, because everything that happened during World War II has an impact on your life today, one way or another. And you may not realize it. You may not realize just how big of an impact World War II, its outcome, its technological development has on your everyday life today. But it does. And that is why it's really interesting to study, because there are things that were developed here and other places. Some of them we don't even know what were yet, as we have clearly seen in Lower Silesia. But here we know what they did, and we know what happened to it, and we know what breakthroughs it brought us after the war.
And now that we all have an idea of how big, elaborate, and expensive it is to make rockets, we're going back to Lower Silesia. We're going to Castle Fürstenstein. I want to see the tunnels underneath. I found some other leads for the henge, and I found a tunnel for Hitler's train that's over 1,600 meters long, hiding in Lower Silesia. And I found some of the missing pictures from the henge, and I found something else.
Is another access tunnel. Now, do you see this? Right there. It's the same access tunnels leading down to the henge that the very heavy-duty electrical cabling ran from the power plant into the mountain.